When I had to work out of town for 3 months, my husband and my mother-in-law cruelly forced my elderly mother out of the house. My mother walked alone, carrying all her belongings, and ended up living by herself in her old hometown without help from anyone. When I found out the truth, I acted immediately. Within just 2 hours, I made sure my husband and mother-in-law would face their consequences. They screamed in hysteria. Before the story begins, please write in the comments where you're watching this story from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can continue to grow and bring you even more powerful stories. That morning, the air felt unusually cold, as if nature itself was sending a warning that this would not be an ordinary day. The sun had not fully risen over the eastern horizon, yet activity was already evident inside a cozy, modern, minimalist house. Clara, a successful career woman wearing a soft-colored shawl, was busy zipping up her large suitcase. Her face looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the heavy weight pressing on her heart. Today was the day she would leave town for a 3-month business assignment. For Clara, this was more than just a work trip. The major project entrusted to her was the key to a promotion, one that would significantly improve her family's future. But behind her professional ambition, anxiety twisted in her chest every time her eyes drifted toward a rattan chair in the corner of the living room. Sitting there was Margaret, Clara's mother. The elderly woman looked fragile, her hair completely white, her posture weak. Her eyes often stared blankly, clear signs that memory loss was slowly claiming her. Margaret was everything to Clara. Ever since her father passed away decades ago, her mother had sacrificed everything to raise her into the successful woman she is today. Seeing her once strong mother now weak and forgetful felt like knives slicing through her heart, especially knowing she had to leave her for such a long time. Clara walked slowly, knelt in front of her mother, and gently held her wrinkled, cold hands. The rough skin told stories of years of hardship and struggle. She kissed the back of her hand for a long time, pouring love and silent apologies into that single gesture. Just then, footsteps approached. Daniel, Clara's husband, appeared with a bright smile. Behind him stood Helen, Clara's mother-in-law, wearing an unusually warm expression. Daniel sat beside Clara and wrapped an arm around her shoulders, speaking softly and reassuringly. He promised that Clara had nothing to worry about. He would take care of Margaret as if she were his own mother. The words flowed smoothly, effortlessly. He assured her that for the next 3 months, Margaret would receive proper care, nutritious meals, and full attention from him and Helen. Helen quickly chimed in, nodding confidently. She told Clara to focus on her work, saying everything at home, including Margaret, would be their responsibility. She even pretended to gently massage Margaret's shoulders, a rare display of affection she had never shown before. Seeing their apparent harmony, Clara's heart softened. Her worries faded, replaced with cautious relief. Even though, deep down, she knew the relationship between her mother and her mother-in-law had never been warm, she chose to trust them for peace of mind. Before leaving, Clara reached into her handbag and pulled out a debit card. She handed it to Daniel seriously, explaining that it contained funds specifically for groceries, medication, and vitamins for her mother, several thousand US dollars set aside for Margaret's care. She emphasized that the money must be used wisely. Daniel accepted the card with both hands. For a brief moment, his eyes sparkled, but he quickly masked his greed behind a respectful nod. Helen glanced at the card too, her gaze unreadable, though her smile never faded. Soon, the company car honked outside the gate. Clara hugged her mother tightly once more. Suddenly, Margaret clutched Clara's sleeve, her cloudy eyes filled with fear. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Clara wiped her mother's tears, whispering promises that she would call often and return as soon as possible. Daniel helped load the suitcase into the trunk. From the porch, Helen waved enthusiastically, playing the role of the loving mother-in-law. Clara got into the car. The window slowly rolled up, separating her from her family. Through the tinted glass, she saw Daniel place an arm around Helen's shoulder as they waved goodbye. It looked like a perfect picture of a loving family. The car pulled away. Clara kept looking back until the house disappeared from view. She took a deep breath, telling herself to focus on her future for her mother's sake. But what happened moments after the car vanished was beyond imagination. Daniel's warm smile vanished instantly, replaced with a cold, frightening expression. Helen's friendly face twisted into one of pure resentment. She planted her hands on her hips, glaring at Margaret, who still sat quietly in the right-hand chair. Without hesitation, Daniel stormed inside, followed by his mother. They didn't offer Margaret water or comfort. Instead, Daniel stood over her and barked harshly, ordering her to stand up. Margaret trembled in fear, shocked by his sudden cruelty. Helen began ranting about how sick she was of pretending to be kind. She declared that this house was now under their control, and there was no room for a senile old woman who was nothing but a burden. Daniel grabbed Margaret's arm and yanked her violently up. Her weak body nearly collapsed. He dragged her, not to the guest room, but toward the back door leading to the storage area. Helen followed, laughing softly while flipping Clara's debit card in her hand, already imagining luxury purchases. In the dusty backyard, Daniel shoved Margaret to the concrete floor. He pointed to a dark, suffocating storage room, once used for rice sacks. "This is where you sleep now," he threatened. He forbade her from entering the living areas unless ordered to clean. Helen added mockingly that Margaret's food would now depend on how hard she worked. Margaret cried silently in the darkness. The door slammed shut. Meanwhile, Daniel and Helen returned to the air-conditioned living room, lounging on the sofa, turning on the large flat-screen TV, and planning how to enjoy Clara's money. They had no idea that every act of cruelty carries its own consequence. 1 month later, in a bustling foreign city of towering skyscrapers, Clara was drowning in work. Meetings, presentations, site visits. Though exhausted, her spirit stayed strong. But her thoughts never left home. Every night, she tried to video call Daniel, desperate to see her mother. Yet each time he made excuses. Margaret is sleeping, bathing, out walking. Until one night, Clara noticed a strange woman passing behind Daniel on the screen. Her heart stopped, and the truth began to unravel. She tried calling Daniel's personal phone, but the line was busy. Either he was on another call or had deliberately turned it off. She then called Helen's phone. The result was the same, no answer. Clara felt completely isolated, far from home, blind to what was happening to the person she loved most. The next morning, Clara's face looked drained, dark circles shadowing her eyes. At the office, she struggled to focus. The reports piled on her desk felt like meaningless sheets of paper. Then it happened. A text message arrived from Sophie, one of her closest neighbors back home. The message was short, but it made Clara's heart stop for a moment. "Clara, where did Margaret go? The house has been quiet for almost a month now. I only see Daniel, his mother, and a young woman who often comes and goes using your car. I wanted to bring some sponge cake for Margaret, but the gate is always locked." Clara's hands trembled violently. Her phone nearly slipped from her grasp. The neighbor said the house felt empty. Margaret hadn't been seen for a month, yet Daniel claimed Margaret was healthy and active. Two realities stood in direct contradiction, and Clara knew which one was far more likely to be true. Daniel's lies were unraveling one by one. He wasn't just hiding something, he was hiding Margaret. And the mention of a young woman using Clara's car only strengthened her suspicions about Wendy, not a cousin, but someone now enjoying the life Clara had worked herself to exhaustion to build. Anger began to surge through Clara's body, replacing the sorrow that had dominated her heart. She felt betrayed, manipulated, and made a fool of by the very people who were supposed to protect her family in her absence. But above all that rage, the fear for her mother's fate was the most unbearable. If the neighbors hadn't seen Margaret and Daniel had lied, then where was she? Horrifying thoughts flooded Clara's mind. Her mother sick and abandoned, or worse, thrown out. That very second, Clara made a reckless decision. She no longer cared about the crucial presentation scheduled in 2 days. She didn't care if she was reprimanded by her superiors. She opened a flight booking app and searched for the earliest possible flight home, today. She would not tell Daniel. She would return silently, like a ghost coming back to demand the truth. She had to see with her own eyes what had really happened in the house she built with sweat and tears. Breathing fast, Clara hurriedly packed her things. Her instinct screamed that she was racing against time, and she prayed she wasn't already too late to save her mother. The plane landed smoothly, but Clara's heart felt like it was crashing through a storm. As soon as she exited the arrival terminal, she didn't give the driver her own home address. Her instincts told her that if she confronted them directly, Daniel and Helen would already have a story prepared, another performance to cover their rot. Clara needed proof. She needed the raw, unfiltered truth. So she gave the taxi driver Sophie's address, the neighbor who had sent the disturbing message. During the ride, Clara clenched her cold hands tightly, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. But the reality she was about to face would be far more painful than any nightmare. The taxi stopped in front of Sophie's gate. Clara stepped out hurriedly, dragging her heavy suitcase, ignoring the sweat forming on her forehead. She rang the doorbell repeatedly. Moments later, Sophie appeared, shock written all over her face. She hesitated before opening the gate, clearly afraid Daniel or Helen might see Clara there. Clara begged to be let inside. Seeing Clara's swollen red eyes, Sophie's heart softened. She pulled her in quickly and closed the curtains tightly, making sure no one from across the street could spy on them. Inside the silent living room, Clara went straight to the point. "Where is my mother?" Sophie lowered her head, her hands shaking as she held a glass of water. She admitted she'd been too afraid to speak sooner. Daniel had threatened the neighbors, saying anyone who interfered in his household would be reported to the police for defamation. But Sophie's conscience wouldn't let her stay silent forever. In a whisper, she revealed she had saved CCTV footage from the neighborhood security post, a camera that directly faced Clara's front gate. She opened her laptop and played a video dated 1 month ago, the very night Clara left for her business trip. Clara held her breath. The grainy footage showed the gate opening at 2 a.m. She saw Daniel dragging something heavy. Clara's heart dropped when she realized it wasn't an object, it was Margaret. Her elderly mother was being dragged out of the yard like an animal. Margaret tried to cling to the gate, but Daniel slapped her hands away violently, causing her to fall onto the cold asphalt. Then Helen appeared, carrying a large black plastic sack. She threw it at Margaret while angrily yelling at her face, pointing at her with hatred. After that, they went back inside, locked the gate, and left Margaret alone in the freezing darkness. On the screen, Clara saw her mother crying, pounding the gate, begging to be let back in, while the house lights were turned off. Eventually, clutching the sack, Margaret staggered away, disappearing into the night with no destination. Clara stifled a scream, covering her mouth as her body shook violently. Sophie cried too, holding Clara, apologizing for being unable to help that night. Everyone had been asleep. She only discovered the footage the next morning and had lived with fear and guilt ever since. Clara wiped her tears roughly. Her grief transformed into burning rage. She asked where Margaret went after that cursed night. Sophie said a street vegetable vendor mentioned seeing Margaret wandering in a slum area about 6 miles from the residential complex, sleeping in front of closed shops or empty shacks, often mistaken for a mad beggar. Clara wasted no time. She thanked Sophie, asked her to stay silent, and copied the CCTV footage to her phone. Undeniable legal evidence. Leaving her suitcase, Clara ran outside and ordered a motorcycle ride. She didn't care about her disheveled appearance. She had one goal: find her mother now. The motorcycle sped through traffic towards the city outskirts. Skyscrapers slowly gave way to overcrowded shacks. The smell of garbage mixed with thick dust in the air. Clara arrived in a slum area, muddy roads, black stagnant puddles everywhere. She walked through narrow, damp alleys, showing her mother's photo to anyone she met. Most ignored her. Finally, a small shop owner squinted at the photo and nodded, pointing towards an empty lot near a polluted river. Clara's heart pounded. Among piles of scrap metal and tall weeds stood a collapsing shack made of rusted tin and torn tarps. And there, sitting on cardboard, eating discarded food, was Margaret. Clara's legs weakened. Her once clean, dignified mother now looked unrecognizable. Her white hair was matted and filthy. Her dress was torn, stained brown with mud. Her feet were swollen, covered in infected wounds. Clara approached, crying uncontrollably. Margaret recoiled in terror, shielding her face, begging for mercy, thinking Clara was Daniel or his enforcers. The trauma was so deep she didn't recognize her own daughter. Clara dropped to the muddy ground, hugging her frail body tightly, screaming apologies over and over. Slowly, Margaret recognized her. They cried together. Through broken sentences, Margaret told her everything, including how Daniel had forcibly taken her gold wedding ring, the last memory of Clara's late father, laughing as he said it was better sold. He planned to buy a new gold necklace for Wendy. That was the moment Clara's sorrow turned into something far colder. She kissed her mother's forehead and whispered a promise. "This ends today." Clara was going home, not as the gentle woman she once was, but as a cold executioner. She would return as the rightful owner of every luxury that had long been enjoyed by parasites who lived off her blood and sweat. Her usually soft features hardened, her gaze sharpened, fixed straight ahead on the asphalt road as if it were the fate of Daniel and his family, one she was about to step on and crush without mercy. When she arrived at the gated elite neighborhood where she lived, Clara did not honk. She opened the automatic gate using an app on her phone, deliberately avoiding any noise that might draw attention. Her car rolled slowly into the carport. From behind the windshield, she could see bright light pouring from the dining room windows. The curtains were not fully drawn, allowing her to see lively silhouettes moving inside. Laughter drifted faintly through the glass. Laughter that made her stomach turn. Laughter built on her mother suffering, on Margaret, who had nearly died of hunger. Clara stepped out of the car without slamming the door. She walked toward the front entrance without knocking. She took out the spare key she always carried and slid it into the lock with slow, deliberate certainty. Click. The door opened. Cool air from the central AC washed over her skin, sharply contrasting with the damp night outside. The aroma of expensive food, grilled meat mixed with rich spices, hit her instantly. So different from the stench of garbage and mud she had smelled earlier, where her mother had been abandoned. Her heel struck the marble floor, producing rhythmic clicks that sounded like a countdown to destruction. Inside the grand dining room, the sight before her made her blood boil. A long teak dining table was covered with luxurious dishes, steaming imported steaks, plates of large grilled shrimp, and crystal glasses filled with deep red fruit juice. Daniel sat at the head of the table, wearing a casual shirt with the top buttons undone. His face was flushed from laughter and indulgence. To his right sat Helen, his mother, slicing meat with silver cutlery. A thick gold necklace gleamed at her neck under the chandelier. But the figure that burned Clara's eyes the most was the young woman seated to Daniel's left, Wendy. She was wearing a sea blue silk dress that belonged to Clara, a dress Clara had bought at an overseas boutique last year and treasured deeply. On Wendy's wrist was a luxury watch, a birthday gift Clara had received from her company. Wendy laughed sweetly as she fed Daniel a piece of shrimp, while Daniel's arm rested possessively around his waist. They looked like a perfect, happy family, a family built on lies and cruelty. "Have some more, babe, it's still warm," Wendy said in a soft, playful voice. Daniel laughed. "Sure, sweetheart, you really know my taste. Good thing Clara's away on a business trip. We can eat well every day without her lectures about cholesterol." Helen chuckled with her mouth full. "That's right, she's exhausting, always restricting, always saving money even though she earns so much. Wendy's better, generous, knows how to treat her elders." "Well," Clara's voice cut through the laughter like a lightning strike. "This looks like quite the celebration." Her voice wasn't loud. It was flat, controlled, and terrifying. The room fell into instant silence. Daniel choked on his food. His eyes widened as he saw Clara standing calmly at the entrance, arms crossed. Wendy dropped her fork. The sharp clang echoed through the room, her face drained of color. Helen froze mid-bite, her mouth still open. They stared as if they were seeing a ghost. "Clara, darling, when did you get back?" Daniel stammered, forcing a trembling smile as he stood. Clara stepped closer, slowly circling the table like a lion stalking its prey. Her gaze stopped on Wendy. She reached out and lightly touched the silk fabric on Wendy's shoulder. Wendy flinched violently. "Beautiful dress. It fits you perfectly. The watch, too. I swear I used to own ones exactly like these," Clara said coolly. "And you, Daniel's distant cousin who was supposed to be staying in the guest room, why does dinner look so intimate?" Daniel rushed to interrupt, sweat forming on his forehead. "Listen, Clara, this isn't what you think. Wendy was just helping because my hands were dirty, right, Mom?" Helen cleared her throat and tried to sound firm. "Clara, you just got home and you're already suspicious. Wendy's a good girl. She helped around the house while you were gone. You should be thanking her." Clara let out a quiet laugh, dry and unsettling. "Thank her? thank her for taking such good care of my mother?" At the mention of Margaret, the atmosphere shifted. Daniel stiffened. Helen looked away. "Oh, your mom is staying with Sophie," Daniel said quickly. "She wanted to visit family." Clara raised her eyebrow. "Sophie, the one who passed away 2 years ago, so my mother followed her to the grave." Daniel froze. Suddenly, bang! Clara slammed her palm at the table. Plates rattled. Red juice spilled across the white tablecloth like spreading blood. "Enough, Daniel." Her voice thundered. "I know everything. I know you threw my mother out like trash. I know you let her starve, sleep in the rain, eat leftovers from garbage bins while you feasted here with my money." Silence. Daniel collapsed back into his chair. Helen said nothing. Wendy's tears fell freely. "Eat," Clara said calmly, smiling coldly. "Enjoy this food. It's the last meal you'll ever have in this house. You have 2 hours." She placed her phone on the table. 2 hours to pack. After that, you'll experience what my mother did. No home, no money, no dignity. She walked to the living room sofa, sat down casually, crossed her legs, and activated her tablet. When Helen protested, Clara tapped one button. Click. The house went dark. Lights, AC, power, gone. Then Daniel's phone buzzed violently. Bank notifications flooded the room. Credit cards permanently blocked. Online banking access revoked. Digital wallets frozen. Balance $0. "That joint account," Clara said softly, "it was 100% my salary. You never put in a single dollar." Wendy's phone rang next. She answered with trembling hands. His father's panicked voice echoed through the darkness. Lawyers, debt, police threats. Mr. Raymond was being investigated. Wendy collapsed to the floor. 1 hour left, Clara said calmly, her eyes glowing blue from the tablet screen. "Pack your things, or strangers will throw you out." The lavish dinner had turned to hell, and Clara, the architect of their downfall, smiled. No one answered his calls at this late hour, or perhaps news of his downfall had already spread faster than he expected. Just as Daniel was about to throw himself onto the sofa in frustration, the deep rumble of a heavy vehicle stopped outside the house. It was followed by the loud slam of multiple car doors closing in unison. Before Daniel could even wonder who had arrived, the front door was pounded violently. Bam! 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 The knocking was rude, urgent, and full of intimidation. Daniel's heart nearly burst out of his chest. He turned toward Clara, who was still sitting calmly, the glow of her tablet illuminating her expressionless face. She didn't look surprised at all. Instead, she closed her work app and stared at the front door as if inviting it to open. "Open it, dear," Clara said coldly. "Our guests have arrived. It's rude to keep them waiting outside." With trembling steps, Daniel walked toward the door. His mind raced, hoping desperately that it was the police, someone who could stop his wife's madness. But the moment he unlocked the door and swung it open, that hope shattered instantly. Standing before him were not uniformed officers, but 6 broad-shouldered men dressed in black uniforms bearing the logo of a law firm and an asset recovery company. At the front stood a middle-aged man wearing thick glasses and a neat suit, holding a red folder. It was Mr. Raymond, the senior lawyer trusted by Clara's family, whom Daniel hadn't seen in years. Mr. Raymond did not smile. He immediately switched on a powerful flashlight and aimed it straight at Daniel's face, blinding him and forcing him to step back. Without asking permission, Mr. Raymond walked inside, followed by the 6 men. They carried moving equipment, large cardboard boxes, and rolls of heavy tape. The dark living room was instantly flooded with harsh, tactical flashlight beams, casting terrifying shadows along the walls. Helen screamed in shock as strangers stormed into what she considered her palace. "Good evening, Mr. Daniel, Mrs. Helen," Mr. Raymond greeted stiffly. "On behalf of our client, Mrs. Clara, and based on a valid power of attorney, we are here to execute the seizure of movable assets purchased using credit facilities under Mrs. Clara's name, facilities that are now in default after the guarantor was revoked, as well as items proven to have been bought using embezzled company funds." "What is this? Are you thieves? Get out of my house!" Helen screamed hysterically, trying to chase away one of the men who was already approaching the 60-inch flat-screen TV. Calmly, Mr. Raymond opened the red folder and showed a document to Daniel. "This is not robbery, ma'am. This is a legal execution. All electronics in this house, the TV, 4-door refrigerator, washing machine, and home theater system were purchased using installment plans and supplementary credit cards under Mrs. Clara's name. Our client has officially withdrawn payment guarantees. Since Mr. Daniel has no personal income and cannot settle the remaining balance immediately, the leasing company is legally entitled to repossess these items, effective now." Without waiting for Daniel's consent, the executors moved swiftly. 2 men lifted the large TV off the wall, yanking cables out roughly. 2 others headed to the kitchen, emptying the refrigerator. Luxury food, imported fruit, and expensive steak cuts were dumped onto the counter before the massive fridge was hauled out of the house. Chaos filled the home. Helen wailed as she watched her beloved refrigerator being taken away. To her, it was a symbol of social status among her neighbors. "No, that's an expensive fridge. Don't take it," she cried, grabbing one of the men's arms. He brushed her off effortlessly and kept walking. Then Mr. Raymond signaled 2 other men to go upstairs to Helen's bedroom. Her eyes widened in horror. She knew what was there: designer bags, jewelry, and expensive shoes she proudly showed off at social gatherings. She ran upstairs, blocking her bedroom door. "Don't go into my room! Those are my personal belongings!" she screamed. Clara, who had remained silent, now stood and walked slowly to the bottom of the stairs. She looked up at her mother-in-law. "Personal belongings?" Clara said calmly. "Are you sure, Helen? Didn't you buy them using the debit card I kept in my bedroom safe? I have the bank transaction records, dates, and times that perfectly match the receipts you posted on social media. That's called theft. If you don't want them taken, you're welcome to explain it to the police later." The officers gently pushed open the unlocked door and began clearing the glass cabinets. Luxury handbags worth tens of thousands of dollars were shoved into large plastic sacks as if they were trash. Jewelry boxes were opened, and their contents poured into evidence bags. Helen collapsed onto the bedroom floor, watching everything she'd accumulated through deceit vanish in minutes. She beat the floor and cried like a child who had lost her toys, but no one cared. Downstairs, Daniel tried to fight back. He grabbed Mr. Raymond by the collar. "You can't do this, Raymond. I'm her husband. A wife's property is a husband's property. I'm entitled to half of everything." Mr. Raymond remained unfazed. He smiled thinly and pulled another document from the red folder, stamped and bearing Daniel's own wet signature. "Are you sure you have rights?" Mr. Raymond asked calmly. "Please read the document you signed 6 months ago." Under the flashlight's glare, Daniel read the title, Debt Acknowledgement and Asset Separation Agreement. His eyes widened in horror. He remembered now. 6 months earlier, Clara had handed him a stack of papers, claiming they were health insurance updates and business package forms. Too lazy to read and always underestimating his wife, he signed everything without checking. Hidden among those papers was a statement declaring that all company funds Daniel used would be considered personal debt and that he relinquished any claim to the house assets as collateral. This is a trap," Daniel shouted, his hands shaking. "Not a trap, sir. This was your negligence. You signed with full consciousness and health. According to this document, your total debt to Mrs. Clara amounts to $1 million, accumulated from unauthorized use of company funds over 2 years. Since you cannot repay it, the house and its contents are being seized by Mrs. Clara as settlement. Legally speaking, you are now merely a guest in Mrs. Clara's home, and as the homeowner, she has every right to evict unwanted guests." Daniel staggered backward, hitting the wall. His legs gave out. He had lost completely. The living room that once symbolized his false success was now being stripped bare. Italian leather sofas were carried out, expensive paintings removed. The house slowly returned to an empty shell, just as hollow as Daniel's soul. From the corner of the room, Clara watched him. There was no pity in her eyes, only a cold look that said this was just the beginning. Desperation wrapped around Daniel like suffocating fog. Then one thought struck him, his black sports sedan in the garage. It was the one thing he loved more than anything, perhaps even more than his wife. It was his identity. With that car, he felt powerful. With it, he attracted women like Wendy. Without it, he was nothing. If he had to leave, he would at least take the car. Ignoring Mr. Raymond, Daniel sprinted toward the side door leading to the garage. His breathing was ragged as he fumbled in his pocket for the smart key. His fingers trembled violently as he reached the dark garage. The black sedan gleamed faintly under the streetlight filtering in. Freedom. He pressed the button. Nothing. No beep, no flashing lights. Again, harder, repeatedly. Nothing. Cold sweat soaked his back. He tried holding the key closer to the door handle. Still nothing. The car was completely dead. "Damn it! Why won't it open?" Daniel screamed, pounding the window. Behind him, Clara appeared, walking calmly. Wendy followed, limping slightly, her face swollen from crying. She assumed Daniel would escape with her in the luxury car. "Useless man," Clara said calmly. "I reset the access code online 5 minutes ago. Modern technology. You can disable and lock a car remotely from anywhere." Daniel turned, his face red with rage and despair. "That's my car. I drive it every day. You have no right." Clara folded her arms. "You drive it, but who pays the installments, the taxes, the insurance? Everything is under my company's name. The registration and title belong to the corporation I founded. You were just a user, and since you're no longer part of the company, the vehicle privilege has been revoked." Suddenly, the garage was flooded with blinding yellow light. A diesel engine roared. The garage door opened automatically. A large orange tow truck stood outside, flanked by 2 leasing officers and a police officer. Daniel collapsed to his knees. This wasn't a warning. This was official seizure. The officers attached the tow hooks beneath the front bumper. There was no television left. No expensive ceramic decorations. No imported fur rugs. The house had returned to what it truly was. A cold, hollow structure, empty and lifeless, exactly like it had been before they filled it with greed. Clara stood near the main door, her eyes fixed on the screen of her tablet, her expression flat and emotionless. She didn't look tired in the slightest. Instead, an unmistakable aura of victory radiated from her entire being. She glanced briefly at Daniel, who walked back into the living room with a face crushed by despair. Then her gaze shifted to the digital clock on the wall, now dead, its screen dark. But time on her tablet kept running. The virtual countdown ticked closer, then reached 0. The 2-hour deadline she had given them was over. Clara slid the tablet into her work bag and slowly lifted her eyes, looking at her husband and her mother-in-law in turn. Her gaze was no longer that of a wife or a daughter-in-law. It was the gaze of an owner, examining pests that needed to be removed from her property. A deep, heavy engine roar thundered from the front of the house, far louder than the tow truck earlier. The vibration rippled through the living room floor. Daniel and Helen flinched violently. They exchanged frightened, confused glances. Before they could even process what was happening, the front door swung wide open. A man wearing a white construction helmet and an orange safety vest stepped inside, followed by 2 construction workers carrying a hammer and a crowbar. The man looked surprised to find people still inside the house. He turned toward Clara. He was the head contractor, the one Clara had arranged everything with beforehand. Clara greeted him with a polite nod and calmly explained that the 2 remaining occupants were preparing to leave and would be out within minutes. Daniel immediately protested. "Who are these people? Why are they bringing heavy tools into my house?" Clara turned to him and gave her her final smile, the most painful one he would ever receive. Casually, she explained that this house, the building they were standing in, was no longer his. 1 hour earlier, while Daniel was panicking over his frozen credit cards, Clara had signed the property sale deed in cash to a commercial real estate developer. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. The world spun. She had sold the house, their house. Clara continued calmly. The developer planned to demolish the property and turn it into a parking lot and a row of commercial units. They wanted demolition to begin that very night, so heavy machinery could move in the next morning. Legally speaking, Daniel and Helen were now trespassing, occupying private property without permission. Clara stated coldly that they had to leave immediately, or the developer's security team would remove them by force, like thieves. Helen screamed hysterically. She clung to Clara's legs, begging her not to sell the house, begging to stay just one more night. She claimed her legs hurt. She said it was cold outside. She said she had nowhere else to go. Every excuse only sealed her fate. Clara looked down at her mother-in-law with icy eyes and reminded her of what had happened 1 month earlier. That night had been colder, the rain had been heavier, and Margaret had begged the same way, her legs hurting, her body weak. Helen had kicked her out anyway. Karma was real, and it arrived far faster than Helen had ever imagined. The head contractor, unwilling to waste time, signaled his men. The workers began ripping out the window frames with crowbars. The deafening clang of metal echoed through the house. Dust filled the air. Chaos erupted. Mr. Raymond, Clara's lawyer, instructed the residential security team to assist in removing the illegal occupants. Daniel and Helen had no choice. With trembling hands, they stuffed a few pieces of clothing into black plastic trash bags. Trash bags, because their expensive suitcases had already been seized. That was all they owned now. Used clothes inside garbage bags. Security officers grabbed Daniel and Helen by the arms and forcibly escorted them out through the front door, controlled but firm. Daniel struggled, screaming that he would sue, but his voice was swallowed by the sound of hammers smashing into concrete walls. They were dragged past the front garden, the same garden Helen once proudly showed off, until their feet hit the cold asphalt of the public street outside the gate. The tall iron gates slammed shut behind them, locked. The metallic clang of the padlock sounded like a prison sentence for the comfortable life they had lived. Daniel and Helen stood frozen on the dark roadside. The streetlight in front of the house was broken, plunging the scene into deeper gloom. As if the universe itself supported Clara's revenge, rain began to fall. Slow at first, then heavier, then relentless. Cold night wind pierced their thin clothing. Helen shivered violently, pressing herself against Daniel, but he too was trembling, cold, humiliated, and broken. No neighbors came out. Everyone in the compound knew their reputation and chose to shut their curtains tightly, unwilling to get involved. As the rain poured down, soaking them to the bone, a luxury car rolled slowly out of the garage. It was Clara's car. The rear window lowered smoothly. Daniel and Helen stepped closer, foolish hope flickering in their eyes. Maybe Clara still had a conscience. Maybe she would give them money, or at least a ride to a cheap motel. They reached out with pleading hands. Rain mixed with tears on their faces. Inside the warm, dry car, Clara looked at them without the slightest hint of pity. She reached beside her seat. Not a wallet, not an envelope of cash. She pulled out an old, broken folding umbrella. One of its ribs snapped. An umbrella that Margaret used to carry to the market. Clara tossed it out the window. It landed in a muddy puddle at Helen's feet, splashing filthy water on her legs. "Use that," Clara said flatly, her voice cutting clearly through the rain. "You once threw Margaret out into the rain without an umbrella. I'm still kind enough to give you a broken one. Be grateful." Then, calmly, "Now feel what it's like to be trash, thrown away." The window rolled back up. The car pulled away, slicing through the rain, splashing dirty water on Daniel's pants. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the taillights as they faded and disappeared around the corner. He looked down at the broken umbrella, then at his mother who collapsed on the wet sidewalk, wailing in despair. That night, beneath merciless rain, Daniel and Helen finally understood the true meaning of home, only after they had lost it. Alone, cold, humiliated, exactly as they had done to Margaret. But this time, no devoted child would come to save them. 6 months later. 6 months passed. Time moved quickly for the happy, but crawled painfully for the suffering. For Clara, those 6 months were the most peaceful of her life. After cutting the parasites from her existence, her career skyrocketed. A major project succeeded beyond expectations, earning her a promotion to regional director. Yet her greatest achievement wasn't wealth or title, it was her mother's recovery. Clara bought a new home in a quieter, greener area, far from the city's noise, with cool air and open space. The house was designed to be senior-friendly, complete with a large flower garden in the backyard. That was where Margaret now spent her days. With the best medical care and Clara's unwavering love, her physical condition and memory improved rapidly. She still occasionally misplaced things, but the fear and trauma that once haunted her were gone. That morning, Clara sat on the back porch, accompanying her mother as she watered the orchids. Margaret looked healthy, her face fuller, her smile radiant. No trace remained of the frail old woman scavenging among ruins. "Rena," Margaret said playfully, spraying water on the orchid leaves, "when you come home later, buy me some lupus cake from the old market, all right?" Clara smiled warmly. "Of course, Mom. I'll bring lots. You rest. Don't overdo it. I'm heading to work now." She kissed her mother's hand respectfully and walked lightly